Charlie Munger, Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway for over 6 decades, said that the first 100,000 is the hardest. He used a word before hardest that this channel can't repeat, but the emphasis was clear. Getting to the first 100,000 is a fundamentally different experience than anything that comes after. He didn't say it to be motivational. He said it because the math of compound interest produces a curve that is almost invisible on the left side, noticeably bent in the middle, and nearly vertical on the right. And the transition between those 3 sections follows a specific pattern. 8 years. 4 years, 3 years, that pattern has a name. It's called the 8-4-3 rule. And it's the most useful mental model in all of investing for understanding why patience is the single most important variable. I'm Warren, and the version of this rule that I keep coming back to is the one built on $500 a month at a 10% nominal annual return, which is roughly the historical average of the S&P 500 before adjusting for inflation. The numbers change slightly with different contributions and different return assumptions. The shape of the curve does not. The shape is always the same: flat, then bent, then steep. And the transition points always cluster around the same ratios. Phase 1, the grind. Years 1 through roughly 8. A person investing $500 a month or $6,000 a year into a total stock market index fund at 10% average nominal return will reach approximately $100,000 at around year 7.5 to 8. During those 8 years, total contributions amount to roughly $48,000. Market growth adds roughly $52,000. The split is almost 50-50. The person did half the work, the market did half. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like the person did all the work because the monthly contribution of $500 is a tangible sacrifice, visible in every paycheck, while the market's contribution accumulates silently in the background, invisible until the annual statement arrives. This is the phase where every person in this series spent the longest time and felt the least progress. Devin from video 13. Nate's Gap. Leo from video 7. Adriana from video 9. Each of them described the same sensation: putting money in every month and watching the total barely move. The balance hits 8,000, then 14,000, then 22,000, a year and a half in, and the number is still 4 digits. It's still something that could be wiped out by one bad medical bill or one car repair. The urge to stop is strongest here because the effort to result ratio is at its worst. $500 a month for 18 months is $9,000 in contributions. The market has added maybe 2,000. The total is 11,000. The account statement feels like proof that investing is slow, boring, and possibly not worth the sacrifice. If you've ever opened an investment app, seen a balance that was barely higher than last month despite consistent contributions, and felt a knot of frustration in your chest, that's phase 1. That knot is the correct emotional response to the flat section of the curve. It doesn't mean the system is failing, it means the system is in its slowest phase. The frustration is real. The math underneath it is also real. And the math wins over any timeline longer than 7 years. But here's the engineering detail that changes the interpretation entirely. During phase 1, the portfolio is accumulating mass. During phase 1, the portfolio is accumulating mass. Each dollar invested is a unit of mass that will eventually generate its own gravity. At $10,000, the portfolio generates roughly 1,000 in annual growth. At 30,000, roughly 3,000. At 50,000, roughly 5,000. By the time the balance approaches 80,000, the portfolio is generating 8,000 a year in growth alone, which is more than the annual contribution of 6,000. That's the crossover point, the moment where the market's contribution exceeds the person's contribution. And it happens quietly, usually somewhere around year 6 or 7, without any notification, any celebration, or any change in the monthly statement format. Most people pass through this moment without noticing it, but it's the most important inflection in the entire curve. If you're in phase 1 right now, the number on the screen is almost irrelevant. What matters is the mass being built underneath it. Every month of contribution in phase 1 is a month of adding mass that will generate returns in phases 2 and 3. Skipping a month in phase 1 doesn't just cost $500, it costs the 30 years of compounding that $500 would have generated. A single skipped month in year 2, compounded at 10% for 28 remaining years, costs roughly $7,300 at the end of the timeline. That's the hidden price of one pause, 1 month, $7,000. That's why the compliance officer, the surgeon, Marcus Ray Ni Ahomnegi, and every other person in this series who built wealth did the same thing during phase 1. They didn't look at the number. They looked at the transfer. The transfer happened. The number took care of itself. The person who stares at the balance during phase 1 will always feel like it's not working. The person who stares at the transfer knows it is. There's a practical test for anyone currently in phase 1. Open the investment account. Look at the total balance. Now look at how much of that balance came from contributions versus how much came from market growth. If contributions are still larger than growth, the portfolio is in phase 1. That's not bad news. That's the expected state. The ratio will flip. It always does. But it flips at the portfolio's schedule, not the person's. Phase 2. The acceleration. Years 8 through 12. From 100,000 to roughly 200,000. This phase takes approximately 4 years at the same $500 a month. Total new contributions in this phase, about 24,000. Market growth in this phase, roughly 76,000. The ratio has inverted. The person contributes about a quarter of the growth. The market contributes 3/4. The monthly statement starts behaving differently. Some months the market adds $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. The person added 500, the portfolio is doing the heavy lifting, and the person is watching. The psychological shift in phase 2 is visible. Devin described it as watching a second person show up to carry the load. After 8 years of pushing alone, the weight suddenly got lighter. Not because the contribution changed, because the mass reached a threshold where compound returns became the dominant force. The feeling isn't excitement. It's relief, and a quiet disbelief that the same $500 that felt insignificant in year 2 now feels like a rounding error compared to what the market is adding on its own. If you've been investing for 8 or 9 years and recently noticed that the balance jumps more between statements than it used to, that's the phase 2 shift happening in real time. The portfolio crossed the mass threshold. The market is now contributing more per month than the person is. That feeling of the number moving on its own without any additional effort is compound interest becoming visible for the first time. It was always there, it was always working. But below 100,000, the absolute dollar amounts were too small to register as meaningful. Above 100,000, they register. There's a specific moment in phase 2 that deserves attention. Somewhere around the 140,000 mark, the portfolio starts generating roughly 14,000 a year in growth. That's over 1,000 a month in passive growth. The portfolio is now earning more per month than the person is contributing. From this point forward, even if the person stopped contributing entirely, the portfolio would continue growing, though obviously slower. That realization that the portfolio no longer depends on the person to survive is the second major identity shift. The first was at 10,000, as discussed in video 1. This one is quieter, but deeper. The money doesn't need the person anymore. The person needs the money. Phase 3, the momentum. Years 12 through 15. From 200,000 to roughly 300,000. This phase takes approximately 3 years. Contributions, about 18,000. Market growth, roughly 82,000. The market is now contributing more than 4 times what the person puts in. The curve on the chart, the one from the opening of this video, is visibly steep. The monthly statements show 5-figure swings in either direction. A good quarter adds 15 or 20,000. A bad month subtracts 8. The volatility increases with the balance, but the long-term trajectory is unmistakable. This is the phase where the portfolio starts to feel like a separate entity. Not a savings account, not a number on a screen. Something that has its own momentum, its own trajectory, its own weight. The person checks the balance and the number has moved by more than their entire monthly contribution in either direction. The contribution itself starts to feel symbolic. $500 a month into a $240,000 portfolio is a drop. But stopping the contribution would break the habit, and the habit is what survived phase 1. So the contribution continues, not because it's mathematically significant, because it's structurally significant. It's the thread that connects the person to the machine. If you reach phase 3 and feel tempted to increase risk, to chase higher returns, to move from index funds into individual stocks because the balance now feels large enough to experiment with, that temptation is the most dangerous moment in the entire curve. Phase 3 is where the portfolio is most vulnerable to behavioral mistakes, because the swings are large enough to trigger emotional responses. A 10% drop on 300,000 is 30,000. That's a year's worth of contributions gone in a month. The person who panics and sells locks in the loss. The person who holds and continues contributing recovers and accelerates. Adriana's rule from Video 9 applies here more than anywhere else. Never sell in a down market. In Phase 3, that rule isn't philosophy, it's survival. And here's where the pattern reveals its full shape. 8 years to the first 100,000, 4 years to the second, 3 years to the third. If the trend continues, and historically it does, the fourth 100,000 takes roughly 2.5 years. The fifth takes about 2. The curve doesn't flatten, it steepens. Every 100,000 comes faster than the last because each new base is larger and each year's percentage return produces a larger absolute number. At 500,000, 10% growth is 50,000 a year. At 700,000, it's 70,000. By the time the balance crosses $1 million, 10% growth is 100,000 a year. The person's 500 a month, 6,000 a year is 6% of the portfolio's annual growth. The machine built itself. The person just didn't stop it. If you open this video hoping for a shortcut through Phase 1, there isn't one. The only variable that changes the duration is the monthly contribution amount. At 1,000 a month instead of 500, Phase 1 compresses from 8 years to about 5.5. At 200 a month, it stretches to roughly 13 years. At 1,500, it shrinks to about 4. But the shape of the curve never changes. The grind always comes first, the acceleration always follows, and the momentum always arrives for the person who doesn't stop. Here's the thing Munger knew that most investing content doesn't say clearly enough. The 843 rule isn't a strategy. It's a description of reality. It describes what compound interest does over time, regardless of the fund, the platform, the strategy, or the person. The curve doesn't care about motivation. It doesn't reward enthusiasm. It rewards mass and time. Mass comes from contributions. Time comes from not stopping. Everything else is noise if you want to know which phase applies to your current situation. The calculation takes about 30 seconds. Pull up the investment balance, divide it by 100,000. If the result is below 1, Phase 1. Between 1 and 2, Phase 2. Above 2, Phase 3. The phase determines what the experience feels like, and knowing which phase is active removes the single biggest source of frustration in long-term investing. The feeling that the math isn't working when it is. The quote from the beginning of this video, the one about the first 100,000 being the hardest, lands differently now. It's not advice, it's a warning about the shape of the curve. The first section is flat, it's supposed to be. The person who quits in the flat section never sees the bend, and the bend is where everything changes. Munger wasn't motivating anyone. He was describing the terrain, and the terrain doesn't change regardless of who walks it. From 100,000 to 1 million. The snowball math extended across the full timeline. 3 phases become 6. The numbers get large enough to feel unreal. That's the next video. The curve continues.